Okay, you've asked me for a little bit of help on this assignment. I thought this would be the best way. So, this will kind of walk you through what and how this goes about. So, on the very first page of this assignment, you have a chart. And you will notice in the middle that the policies, which I went over in the presentation, are listed in the middle. And notice, yes, they do take up more than one row because, for example, this means that there are going to be 4 events that fall under the policy of containment. They're examples of how the United States practice the policy of containment. And so what you will fill in here is the event, the year that event took place, and how or why it relates to containment. Okay, so it's showing that reaction. So how you get that information is you will use these events that took place during the Cold War. So you don't have to do any outside research. Everything you need to do the chart is here. You just have to go through and read the events and figure out where that event fits as far as the policy. So is this event, for example, the first one is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, if you remember in the presentation I gave, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a specific example listed in the presentation. Now, not all of these are going to be from that presentation I give. The presentation was simply to introduce you to the terms and what they meant and give a few examples. So in this assignment, you're going to have some things that I did not go over in the presentation that you need to figure out based on what you know about those vocabulary terms where they belong. Okay, so starting out, for example, the Cuban Missile Crisis, since it was discussed in the presentation. The Cuban Missile Crisis, in October of 1962, the Soviet Union deployed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The United States blockaded Cuba and demanded that the missiles be withdrawn. For 13 tense days, it looked like President Kennedy was willing to go to war with the Soviets to get the missiles removed. The crisis was resolved when Russia blinked first and agreed to withdraw the missiles in exchange for lifting the blockade and American agreeing to withdraw missiles from Cuba. So we had put missiles in Cuba. We had put missiles in Turkey. They had put missiles in Cuba. And it was that game of chicken. Who's going to blink first? Who's going to give up first? And so Russia does. And so if you think back to that presentation that I gave, this was listed as an example of brinkmanship. But you can tell by reading it, we were to the brink of war. Okay, remember that I said brinkmanship is anytime America gets very close to war, but doesn't actually end up fighting. Okay, and so the Cuban Missile Crisis, when you go back up to your chart, it's going to be an example of brinkmanship. So in your chart, you would write Cuban Missile Crisis in this area right here. Okay. And then the year it happened, it's already there for you. It was in 1962. And so you would simply put the year of 1962 in the chart. Now, it's an example of brinkmanship. You're telling me, and we said it was an example of brinkmanship. So in this last box, you have to give me 1 or 2 statements on why or how is an example of brinkmanship. So, for example, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us to the brink of war for 13 days. Russia blinked first and removed missiles from Cuba. Okay. And so, and of course, I'm talking too fast, spelled it wrong. There we go. And so here you tell me, this is how, Miss Ogle, it is an example of brinkmanship. This is how I know it is an example of brinkmanship, that it brought us to the brink of war, but Russia blinked first and they removed the missiles from Cuba. We did remove the missiles from Turkey as well. And so what you'll do is you'll go through and you will use each one of these events somewhere in that chart. And so as you read one, first Soviet atomic test. Okay, so as you read it, where does that fit according to the definition of those vocabulary words? There are a few of these, for example, when the Berlin Wall was demolished, that I tell you in the presentation, this is an example of it. I talked about the Korean War a little bit. I talked about the Marshall Plan, Nixon visiting China, Perestroika, that kind of thing. But for example, the Rosenberg spies, I didn't mention those in my discussion, but you should be able to determine where those belong based on the information. My best advice is to go and place the ones that we did talk about in the presentation, place those in the chart first, and then you know exactly how many boxes you have left beside each one of those policies, and that will kind of help you figure out what goes where. Okay, so refer back to the PowerPoint for the definition of those particular policies. But not all of these events are going to be in that PowerPoint, and it's up to you to decide, okay, this is an example of brinkmanship, or this is an example of glasnost, or this is an example of revolution, detente. So you have to figure out where those policies go. Okay. The second part is just simply a review. So once you've filled in the first part, it should be very easy to do this second part. I hope this helps. If you still need more help, do not hesitate to ask. I will be more than happy to explain something for you in detail. Just email me specifically what you are having trouble with, if it's a specific question or a specific policy or a specific event you want me to explain it. I will be more than happy to send you a video explaining that policy again, but just send me an email and let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much.